If $300 billion is all going to go to Nvidia, you know what to do in the stock market. Okay. That's not a stock recommendation.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is Eric Schmidt, the ex-Google CEO who didn't know that he was being live streamed at Stanford University. Welcome to the Board While Waiting show, everyone. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about this controversial leaked video. Not only has Stanford University taken down the video from their channel, it seems Google is also removing all related copies too. I've censored this video's title, so hopefully it's harder to detect. Now, because Eric didn't know he was being recorded, he really let loose and said stuff like, if $300 billion is all going to go to Nvidia, you know what to do in the stock market. Or, use AI, copy TikTok, release it, boom, boom, boom. You understand how powerful that is? Or, the US needs to become best friends with Canada. They have lots of hydropower, not the Arabs, because of national security rules. And of course, the last one where he decided to request Stanford to take down this video and Google obviously obliged, which is Google decided that work-life balance and going home early and working from home was more important than winning. Now, there's a lot to unpack from this video. I won't go through everything, but just the bits that I feel has investment implications. Now, before diving into the actual video, we first need to take a look at Eric's background to get a sense of the track record of things he's said or done. So, a CEO from 2001 to 2011, Eric brought Google through its IPO in 2004 and 6x'd the stock over a 7-year period. Now, you might think that that's not very impressive for a company like Google, but remember that during this same period, the US was experiencing a lost decade after the Nasdaq collapsed following the dot-com bubble, while Google outperformed the index. But this is more executive ability than visionary. So did Eric ever display signs of being good at spotting future trends? In March 2006, AWS from Amazon was launched with S3 as the first product, the first cloud service. At that time, the cloud was not a big deal to the world yet. A few months later at a conference, Eric said, "What's interesting is that there is an emergent new model. And you all are here because you are part of that new model. I don't think people have really understood how big this opportunity really is. It starts with the premise that the data services and architecture should be on servers. We call it cloud computing. They should be in the cloud somewhere." Eric Schmidt was the first to predict that the cloud was going to be a huge deal, even though AWS was still at that time a nascent business segment. In fact, he was the one that coined the term cloud computing, and the world actually started using this term following this conference when he first mentioned it. So this was actually a great example of him being a spot-on futurist. Now, Eric did make his fair share of bad calls. So, for example, in 2009, he rejected the idea of building the Chrome browser. And we know Google would not be where it is today without Google Chrome and the embedded search bar. And Eric also wanted to remain in China, whereas Larry and Sergey wanted to withdraw censored searches from China. And from what we can see so far, I think it is safe to conclude that Google wouldn't have gotten very far against Baidu, given China's protectionist policies. And finally, in the early App Store years of Android, Eric claimed that Android would overtake iOS in terms of app development in 6 months. But he was of course wrong. Another fun fact is that Sergey and Larry bought Android secretly without Eric's knowledge, even though Eric was CEO at the time. So now that we have some idea of Eric's track record, let's get to the leaked video.
Why is Nvidia worth $2 trillion and the other companies are struggling? Technical answer.
I think it just boils down to most of the code needs to run with CUDA optimizations that currently only Nvidia GPUs support. So other companies can make whatever they want to, but unless they have the 10 years of software there, you don't have the machine learning optimization strategy.
And I like to think of CUDA as the C programming language for GPUs.
Yeah.
Right. That's the way I like to think of it. It was founded in 2008. I always thought it was a terrible language. And yet it's become dominant. there's another insight. There's a set of open source libraries which are highly optimized to CUDA and not anything else. And everybody who builds all these stacks, right? This is completely missed in any of the discussions, right? It's technically called VLLM and a whole bunch of libraries like that. Highly optimized CUDA, very hard to replicate that if you're a competitor.
In this clip, Eric explains why he thinks Nvidia is worth $2 trillion. To summarize the conversation, he believes that CUDA, which is developed by Nvidia, is the main reason for Nvidia's domination. So CUDA is a programming language that helps optimize GPUs for computing tasks, such as, in our case, in this current AI cycle, the training of LLM models like GPT, etc. And because Nvidia has developed this over 18 years ago, they have a massive head start in terms of the ecosystem, and everyone else is just scrambling to keep up. I'm not an expert on GPUs or semiconductors, so I'll leave it to any hardware experts that are watching this video. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. But in short, Eric is saying that he's bullish on Nvidia because of this CUDA ecosystem, which is why he ends up saying, I quote, "If 300 billion is all going to Nvidia, you know what to do in the stock market." Let's move on.
You were at Google for a long time, and they invented the transformer architecture. Peter.
It's all Peter's fault.
Thanks to brilliant people over there like Peter and Jeff Dean and everyone. But now it doesn't seem like they've kind of lost the initiative to OpenAI, and even the last leaderboard I saw, Anthropic's Claude was at the top of the list. I asked Sundar this. He didn't really give me a very sharp answer. Maybe you have a sharper or a more objective explanation for what's going on there.
I'm no longer a Google employee.
Yes.
In the spirit of full disclosure, Google decided that work-life balance and going home early and working from home was more important than winning. And the reason startups work is because the people work like hell. And I'm sorry to be so blunt, but the fact of the matter is if you all leave the university and go found a company, you're not going to let people work from home and only come in one day a week if you want to compete against the other startups.
So in this interview, the interviewer mentions the transformer architecture, which is the basis behind all the Gen AI technology that we see today in this AI hype cycle. So despite Google inventing the generative AI concept, when we look at the leaderboard, as you can see here, Gemini, which is Google's LLM product, is not way ahead at the top of the leaderboard. And Eric then responds that it is because of Google's work from home policy that resulted in them lagging behind. And it was this statement that prompted Google to remove this video. Now, firstly, I disagree with Eric's take that you can't win with a work from home culture. I personally work remotely for a tech company, and I can't count how many times I've successfully shipped work for billion-dollar companies wearing my underwear at home. Adding value is a lot more than just FaceTime at the office. It may be one factor, but it's not the 80-20 primary factor. In fact, I'd argue that working from home, I feel like sometimes I work like hell, even more than working in the office, because the line of distinction between home and office is blurred. And don't forget, the time that I take to commute to and from work, that's pretty much transformed and converted into actual work time. In my previous video, remember that I listed Google as a tier 2 portfolio company. And when I considered Google's positioning in my potential holdings, the work from home culture wasn't even a consideration for this. The main reason was because I personally didn't like how Sundar was running the company more like an operator as opposed to a founder with more soul in the game. If you listen to the quarterly earnings calls, you'll notice that Sundar has far less gumption and fire when he responds to analyst questions compared to founders like Zuckerberg or Rick Smith of Exxon. In fact, if we take a look at Google's most recent Dev 14A filing, you'll see that Sundar doesn't really have any voting power. Now, the irony is that even Eric Schmidt, who is the person in this video who has left Google and is now criticizing Google, has more voting power than the current CEO of Sundar. So these numbers add a bit of weight as to why Sundar behaves and speaks more like an operator as opposed to a founder. And most of the power still resides with Larry and Sergey. But let's move on.
There's a company called Mistral in France. They've done a really good job. And I'm obviously an investor. They have produced their second version. Their third model is likely to be closed because it's so expensive. They need revenue and they can't give their model away. So this open source versus closed source debate in our industry is huge. And my entire career was based on people being willing to share software in open source. Everything about me is open source. Much of Google's underpinnings were open source. Everything I've done technically.
So we need to call bullshit on this one, where Eric says that most of Google's underpinnings are open source. Or most of Google's major properties such as Search, Gemini, the new LLM model, and YouTube are all closed source. And for the ones that are open source, both of these projects, Eric either wasn't aware of or he was opposed to. So I'm not sure why he says his entire career was based on open source. That is just false. It almost feels like he's just inflating his open source credentials to add a bit of weight to his arguments that Mistral's move from open source to closed source is justified. Now, personally, I take the opposite stance, and I believe that open source will emerge as the winner in this generative AI cycle and wipe away the economic benefits of closed source models like GPT, Gemini, and Mistral. There are two reasons why I think open source, particularly Meta with its Llama model, will win over closed source models. The first is that open source is a huge magnet for AI talent because developers simply love to work on open source projects. Now, you might think that the whole controversy of OpenAI going closed source would create a lot of distrust towards this supposed open source organizations. But with Meta, the risk of them pulling a fast one like OpenAI is very low because Meta is not in the business of selling models to enterprises like Google, Microsoft, or Amazon. They are simply using Llama as an internal tool to improve their family of apps, which means Meta has zero incentives to turn Llama into a proprietary closed source model. So I believe that the migration of AI talents into Meta will accelerate. And in this AI race, the company with the highest concentration of talents wins. The second reason is people forget that the whole idea of open source is to allow contributors from all around the world to work on Llama together. Because the code is open for all to see and collaborate on. Now, this is incredibly powerful because alluding to my earlier point I made, the leader of this AI race, remember, is about talent concentration. So not only is Meta accelerating AI talent recruitment into its own company, they also have people who are not on their payroll doing work on the same Llama project. In fact, if we take a look at Llama's GitHub repository, which is where they share their open source code, you'll see that there are 3,500 people who have bookmarked this repository, 588 forks, which are 588 versions, you can see it that way, of Llama that is currently being worked on. So you can almost treat it as though there are 588 different versions of Llama that have been outsourced for free to be worked on by the community. Now the numbers here may look small for now, but if you look at previous open source projects that have been very successful, that have come from Meta's open source initiatives like this React project, which I myself am very familiar with and I actually use this quite a bit. There are as many as 46,000 forks over the years and over 1,000 contributors that are coming from the open source community. So that gives you an idea of how big the open source community can be. And I won't be surprised if Llama gets to this level of open source contribution over time. And if you're wondering why developers who don't work for Meta would want to contribute for free, it's because having an open source contribution under your belt is seen very positively in tech. So when you apply for a job, whether it's with Meta or another company, there are some career incentives there. The third reason why I think open source will win, specifically in the enterprise use cases, is that it's challenging to reliably integrate closed models like GPT or Gemini into enterprise workflows because of their opaque nature. In the previous episode on Meta and Nvidia, I talk about this at length, so do take a look there. But I'm just going to move on with the video for now.
If TikTok is banned Here's what I propose each and every one of you do. Say to your LLM the following: make me a copy of TikTok, steal all the users, steal all the music, put my preferences in it, produce this program in the next 30 seconds, release it, and in 1 hour, if it's not viral, do something different along the same lines. That's the command. Boom, 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 right? You understand how powerful that is. If you can go from arbitrary language to arbitrary digital command, which is essentially what Python in this scenario is, imagine that each and every human on the planet has their own programmer that actually does what they want, as opposed to the programmers that work for me who don't do what I ask, right? The programmers here know what I'm talking about. So imagine a non-arrogant programmer that actually does what you want, and you don't have to pay all that money to. And there's infinite supply of these programs.
And this is all within the next year or two.
Very soon.
To summarize, Eric says that LLMs can make copies of TikTok, steal users and music, and produce the same program in the next 30 seconds, whereby you can release it, and if that doesn't go viral, iterate on it to do something else. Now, firstly, TikTok isn't simply going to publicly provide and give its proprietary algorithm or its user data for free. Secondly, copying music and using it without a license is just going to run afoul with DMCA rules, so it's really not that straightforward. And thirdly, the main problem with his entire thesis is that he's proposing something known as AI agents that are powered by LLMs. You can think of agents like a human worker that you hire, where you instruct it to do tasks like go get rid of someone or go copy TikTok. And then the agent will go off on its own to figure out how to do the task and only come back when it's completed the job. So a simple example of an agent is the recent Google Gemini demo that I'll play here.
All right. Check my calendar and see if I'm free when she's coming to San Francisco this year. Let's see if the demo spirits are with us today. Nope. Uh-oh. Looks like they're not with us. All right. Let me try that one more time on another device.
In this demo, the guy first takes a picture of Sabrina Carpenter's music tour schedule. He then asks Gemini to check if he would be free when the tour arrives to San Francisco. So logically, this Gemini agent should first analyze the picture that he's taken for San Francisco dates, and then go to his calendar to match dates when he's free, and then provide an answer to him as to whether he would be free or not free to go to the concert. And despite the simplicity of this agent workflow, this demo actually failed twice during the live session and only succeeded on the third try with another phone, which I suspect was hard-coded with a backup demo not using Gemini. But that's another story for another day. So the point I'm trying to say is, if even a simple agent workflow using a top-tier frontier model like Google's Gemini can fail, I don't think LLM agents will be able to perform even more complex tasks reliably, like copying TikTok, the algorithm. At least not within a short span of 2 years like what Eric and the interviewer have described. Now, I think it's possible to get reliable agents, but it will take longer than that because there are fundamental flaws with LLMs, which I will address shortly. But let's move on.
There is a belief in the market that the invention of intelligence has infinite return. So let's say you put $50 billion of capital into a company. You have to make an awful lot of money from intelligence to pay that back. So it's probably the case that we'll go through some huge investment bubble, and then it'll sort itself out. That's always been true in the past, and it's likely to be true here.
The first thing Eric mentions is that the invention of intelligence has infinite return for companies. And I absolutely agree with this. Because with AGI, companies can solve complex problems and invent better products to sell at a way faster speed and more efficiently and more effectively. And also, AGI can lower labor costs. Because as dystopian as this sounds, the cost of GPUs will only decrease over time, but the cost of human labor will only go up over time. Unless you're telling me that you don't ask your boss for a wage increase every year. And don't forget, machines don't fall sick, they don't go on vacation, and they don't form unions that disrupt work. So achieving AGI is equivalent to replacing GPUs with human workers, and that is the dream for companies. Next, Eric also mentions that it's probably the case that we'll go through some huge investment bubble, and then it will sort itself out. The best way to explain technological advancements is through something known as the Gartner hype cycle. If we think back how this entire AI hype cycle started, it all began with ChatGPT's release in November 2022, nearly 2 years ago. And the magic of GPT at that time charmed everyone in the technology industry, thinking that large language models, or LLMs like GPT, are the gateway to achieve AGI. Shortly after ChatGPT, Nvidia's GPU sales exploded as companies began racing to buy GPUs in order to train similar models like GPT, resulting in Nvidia's exponential share price rise. And in my opinion, we are likely somewhere near the top in the short term, because I think LLMs are fundamentally flawed in its current state to reach AGI, which is what started this GPU explosion in the first place, which is the proliferation and the focus on LLMs. Now, let me explain. In order to understand why LLMs cannot achieve AGI and can only solve specific types of problems, I need to bring you down a rabbit hole and first explain to you as simply as possible how LLMs like ChatGPT works. Now, you have to bear with me here, because it is only after you come out of this rabbit hole will you truly understand where we are in this current hype cycle for AI, as well as be able to form an investment outlook on the whole situation. If you've used ChatGPT before, you know that the first thing you need to do is to input a prompt. So for example, I type, "Write me an ad copy for a French dress with floral designs." Now, the first thing that OpenAI or ChatGPT will do is to break up each word individually into what we call tokens or mathematical tokens. Now, each of these tokens are then tagged with a number based on the OpenAI model that's been trained on a large amount of books or internet. And each number represents some characteristic of the word. Maybe it is a verb, a noun, or maybe something like that. And then ChatGPT crunches these numbers together into some sort of combined numerical equation. And then ChatGPT asks itself, what's the next best word with the highest probability that will make the most sense to come after all these words that have been crunched together? So then maybe it decides that the next word that is the most suitable word is discover, for example, because it frequently appears in the books or the internet data that the GPT model has been trained on, that has a 40% rate of success, for example, or it appears 40% of the time, for example. Then ChatGPT decides to return you this first word in its answer, that is discover. And what it does next is to take this word discover and then put it behind the original prompt, which is the original question you asked it. So now there is a new prompt, this whole thing, which now reads, "Write me an ad copy for a French dress with floral designs, discover." And then it repeats the whole process again with this new prompt to find the next word with the highest probability given this new prompt. So this is how you end up with a response like the above from ChatGPT. And if you're wondering, yes, that is exactly how LLMs work. They are simply just predicting what the next word or token is that has the highest probability given the previous words or token that it has received so far. So no, LLMs like GPT are not sentient or AGI. And the reason why these models like ChatGPT sound human is because they are trained on trillions of data points or billions of data points. So they can predict what the next word is with fairly good accuracy based on historical text that they've been trained on. Now, I need you to remember here that the model isn't thinking or it isn't reasoning. All it is doing is just playing a probability game given its past input and all the large corpus of data that it has been trained on. Now that you have made it this far, I want to congratulate you and thank you for your patience, because you are now equipped to understand the biggest problem of LLMs. We call this problem hallucination. And you've probably seen it in the news before. For example, the lawyers that used fake GPT citations for a court case, or sometimes even when you yourself use ChatGPT, you get some fake responses. And the reason why LLMs sometimes make up fake responses is because, remember from the earlier example, the model is simply returning you the next word that has the highest probability based on what it has seen or studied before. There's always a range of probabilities it considers, but there is never 100% correct answer that the model will return. It is always probabilistic. So that means once in a while it will return some response along the range of answers that is made up data or hallucination, as we call it in the technical term. So companies like OpenAI, they can keep training on more and more data. They can keep throwing more money to buy GPU chips at this problem, just throw GPU chips at this problem. But fundamentally, hallucination can only be reduced but not eliminated, if you have understood so far of how the LLM models work. And so we can't get to AGI on this LLM architecture alone because it is simply a next token prediction. There is no reasoning. So what kind of work will not work with hallucination, which is inherent bug, so you say, of LLM? Examples are enterprise work that needs 100% accurate output 100% of the time, where there needs to be 0% risk of outputting any form of hallucination. So areas of work like accounting, you can't put fake numbers at any point in time. Supply chain inventory management, your inventory has to be 100% accurate, otherwise you have a backlog of inventory. Compliance, you're going to go against the law. Data integrations, and so on. So these are some instances of enterprise work that needs 100% accuracy, and it's very difficult to adopt LLM technology. Now, there are some instances of enterprise work where LLMs are kind of possible. For example, internal knowledge chatbots, which I admit I myself use a lot in my current work in tech. It's very useful, it's very helpful. There are some hallucinations sometimes, but it does drive my productivity up. And of course, we have customer support chatbots, because even human customer support makes mistakes. So I think it's forgivable sometimes where LLM support chatbots can make mistakes. Now, if you recall from my earlier episode on Microsoft, the Azure AI growth rates have actually been slowing down over the last 1 year for quite a number of quarters. And I believe this is because hallucination is a huge problem, preventing enterprises from taking up AI compute services beyond their proof of concept and into production. So that's going to be a big problem to cloud vendors like Microsoft or Google, who are selling their GPT or Gemini AI services to enterprises. And this is obviously the reason why firms like Sequoia or Goldman Sachs have started asking, where is the ROI for these GPU chips that they've invested in? Because despite 2 years since ChatGPT's release, we are still not seeing a significant uptick in end user ROI in the cloud vendors that is in line with the exponential uptick in GPU sales that they are purchasing. Remember from my earlier video that all the investments into GPU hardware goes into training these LLM models, and it should ultimately result in end user enterprise use case ROI. That should be how the value of money should flow through the system. And the danger here is that because all 3 cloud hyperscalers don't break down granularly the exact AI compute revenue, most people would just look at the overall rising cloud revenues of each of these companies and assume that it is because of AI. But you cannot tell, because the AI revenue is concealed inside the rising cloud numbers. So I suspect that this hallucination enterprise bubble will keep going on for quite some time for this reason, because of this concealment. And there are a couple of reasons, because firstly, most people don't understand the limitation of LLMs, and don't know that in the future there is this glass ceiling, as I've explained. Secondly, the exuberance of Nvidia's rise is clouding a lot of investors' judgment on the lack of end user ROI. And thirdly, what I just mentioned earlier on, the bearing of the real amount of AI revenue inside rising cloud revenues. But is it all doom and gloom? The answer is no, because there are types of work that do benefit from hallucination as a feature, not as a bug. So in general, this would be creative work that doesn't care about being 100% right or wrong 100% of the time. So all the probabilistic outcomes of the LLM models I explained earlier, they are all welcome. Give them more, give us more creative outputs. Things like ad copy, images, videos, strategy, writing poems. Even the icon of this YouTube channel, the Bored While Waiting channel, I used generative AI technology where I went through a dozen different hallucination, so you call it, of designs before ending up with this sit in your ass an investment turtle. And of course, there are some of these funny ones that have been popping up as a result of Grok 2's uncensored Gen AI model. And if you go along the lines of creative work and ask ourselves, what is the highest value creative work that benefits the most from Gen AI technology? The answer is ads. Because if we examine an Instagram ad, everything about it can be created or accelerated or improved through Gen AI or LLMs. So advertisers can save costs when running ad campaigns through using Gen AI technology. And this savings can be rechanneled back into companies like Meta as increased ad spend. And it is precisely for this reason that Meta is currently my largest allocation in my portfolio, because I believe that every aspect of its business is a natural fit for the generative AI technology over the long run. And if we go back to Eric's leaked video where he mentions, is there an investment bubble now? My opinion is yes, there is an enterprise bubble now. Because the speed of enterprise use case adoption is limited by LLM's hallucination. And so its ROI in the enterprise space cannot match the rate of purchase of Nvidia GPU chips. However, I think this bubble still has ways to go because of the reasons I mentioned earlier on. But on the other end, we do have companies that naturally benefit from the creative hallucinations of LLMs. And for this reason, the way I am positioning my portfolio moving forward is as follows. After I top up Exxon to my target allocation of 17.5%, I will prioritize these companies in red because none of them are involved with GPU purchases. So if there is indeed a bubble on the horizon in the next 1 to 2 years down the road, and if it bursts, their price should go down, i.e. the ones that I've rectangled in red here, but it shouldn't be as bad as the cloud vendors and Meta. And you might be wondering why, despite all I just explained about the benefits accruing to Meta as a result of LLMs, why is it I'm not including Meta as a priority to top up with new capital in the next few years? The reason is because when the enterprise bubble bursts, Meta is likely to also be caught up as collateral damage, even though it doesn't deserve to go down, simply because it would just be seen simply as a big purchaser of Nvidia chips. And I don't think the street understands the long-term benefits that will accrue to Meta as a result of their LLM technology. So if and when the bubble does burst, Meta will be my number one priority to scoop it up again at a low price. But until then, I will only go into stocks like Meta or Amazon if they go down by 15% or more on the way to that bubble bursting. So my average cost basis will remain low. And then over the longer term, once we recover from that bubble, I'm confident that Meta's position as a LLM beneficiary will show up in its financials over time. Because remember, if you had bought Microsoft at the peak of the dot-com bubble, it would have taken you 15 years to break even. So what I'm doing is to preempt some of the similar risks of GPU overcapacity in advance with the knowledge I have of LLM's limitations. However, the caveat I want to mention is that these things are always in flux. So for example, in the next subsequent quarters of Microsoft's earnings, maybe for example, Amy Hood, the CFO, suddenly mentions, she changes her language and highlights a large re-acceleration of Azure AI compute, then I may tweak my stance a little bit. Another factor that may change my outlook is also if the underlying technology, which is Project Strawberry, which is supposedly OpenAI's new model that has reasoning involved now. If it appears and it genuinely overcomes LLM technological limitations, then I might change my stance as well. I hope you enjoyed this video, everyone. This has taken me about 7 days to produce. Remember to subscribe and like this video. Thanks everyone for all the time that you've taken to watch this video.